Greetings and welcome to today's webinar, To Respect and to Serve, Cultivating a Mission-Based Culture of Campus Policing. I'm Jim McCartan of Fordham University's Theology Department. I'm the chair of the National Seminar on Jesuit Higher Education, which publishes Conversations on Jesuit Higher Education, the sponsor of today's program. For over 30 years, Conversations has helped foster important questions and conversations on mission and Jesuit higher education. And today I am pleased to convene a panel exploring what mission means in the context of campus policing. In a moment, I'll introduce our moderator, after which we'll hear from 4 panelists. But now I want to invite audience members to share your questions in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. You can submit questions at any time, and later in the program, panelists will have a chance to respond. Now it's my pleasure to introduce to you our moderator, Dr. Shannon Gary. Dr. Gary is Associate Vice President for Student Life and Dean of Students at the University of San Francisco. He has worked in academic advising and student life at various institutions, including Montclair State in New Jersey and Drexel and Temple Universities in Philadelphia. Dr. Gary serves as a leader on USF's Progressive Policing Community Advisory Board, which works to ensure that community safety needs are met by addressing community crime, quality of life, social justice, and restorative justice issues. Dr. Gary, I hand things over to you, and I thank all of you for being here with us today. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate that. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this important conversation. We're really going to be looking at discussing the role of mission in understanding and practicing campus safety, security, and policing, and how that all works together. We are really going to be focusing on our panelists who we have entrusted on our campuses to do this work, and they're coming from a variety of institutions from across the AJCU network. We are really hoping to have this be an open-ended conversation around how Jesuit mission is informing the work that's being done by police on our campuses, and really highlighting the complexities that exist with campus policing today. And ultimately exploring, how we may be able to reimagine or reconsider or reconceptualize how some of that work is done. I think that you will all agree that we are at a watershed moment with policing, and our campus policing, campus safety departments are not exempt from what we're seeing in the broader context of our society. They are facing competing priorities, dealing with the actual safety of campus, the community desires and wants, the notion of abolitionism, equity and inclusion, traditional policing versus community policing. All of these things are in works today. Existing in a system that's foundationally been built off of a racist point of view, simultaneously existing in a world where they are welcomed and unwelcomed, both at the same time, and within the same community, depending on who you're speaking to. The necessity to balance the needs and wants of all the campus constituencies that exist on campus. And for our campuses in particular, through the AJCU network, how to incorporate Jesuit mission in meaningful ways when you are trying to ensure campus safeties and such. At USF, we have embarked upon an initiative called Reimagining Policing. It's a 2-year initiative. We are in the 3rd semester of 4 with moving forward with this. It was an initiative that's been funded by our Jesuit Grants program and connected with some other anti-racism, anti-Blackness initiatives on campus. There's been a lot of necessary pre-work to get everyone prepared for the conversations that are going to happen. We've coordinated dialogues with impacted groups. We're thinking about how policing entities perpetuate or combat the current narrative around policing in America, and how this reflection can be a conduit to change, and hopefully common ground when we get to the end of this process at the end of spring 22. Some of the pre-work that we've included has been webinar series, facilitated conversations with our officers in the Department of Public Safety, where they've really looked at training with deepening self-reflection and analysis. We are hoping that some of this work will be supporting them as they continue to build their capacity to listen and share their stories about personal experiences with racial identity, racism on a personal, institutional, and social level. Topics have included journey lines, restorative justice principles and practices, intersecting identities, power and privilege, and race and campus policing. So we've had these really deep, rich conversations that's including all of this stuff in preparation for our officers to be able to hear directly from the community. The end result of this is that we're hoping we will end up with a list of recommendations that will be submitted to our Board of Trustees about how policing can be reconceptualized based on the feedback from our community members and our officers. At the heart of this work, though, is our mission. That's really what we're grounding all of this in, being people for others. What does that really mean, particularly in the context of being an officer? Caring about the whole person, cura personalis, really embracing that ethos of magis, the more. And, this is just one example of how we on our campuses can reconceptualize policing to be more inclusive, to be more equitable, and to be community minded. So, as we embark on our conversation today with our fine panelists here, I just wanted to sort of give that example of what we're doing as one institution at USF. It takes time, it takes energy, and it takes commitment, but it can be done. And I think we're going to hear a lot more of this kind of work being done at the various institutions that are represented here today. So at this time, I would like to introduce our four panelists. First, I would like to introduce Chief Sean DeYoung, who is the Director of Public Safety at the College of the Holy Cross. During her career, she has served as the Chief of Police at Springfield Technical Community College, the Detective Sergeant at Boston College, and a detective at the University of North Carolina at Wilmington. Chief DeYoung currently chairs the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee for the Massachusetts Association of Campus Law Enforcement Administrators, and she heads a staff of about 20 at Holy Cross. We also have with us Chief Edith Hudson, and she heads up Marquette University's Police Department and is the former Assistant Chief of Police for the Milwaukee Police Department, where she held progressive leadership roles over 25 years before retiring in 2015. Chief Hudson has spent much of her career advocating for community policing initiatives, and at Marquette, she leads over 80 public safety professionals, including law enforcement officers, public safety officers, dispatchers, and other support staff. We also have with us Sergeant Kevin Rood. He's an investigator at the University Police Department at the University of Scranton, where he has been on staff since 2010. He has been a member of the Northeastern Pennsylvania Crisis Intervention Team Planning Board, as well as a coach and active community volunteer. He has also been a member of the University of Scranton Staff Senate, and in recognition of his service to community both on and off campus, was the recipient of the university's 2019 Lift Up Your Hearts Award. Dr. Tobias Wainwright is our final panelist, and he's the Associate Professor of Healthcare Ethics and Theological Studies at SLU and is a former law enforcement officer. No, sorry, SLU, that's St. Louis University, for those of you who may not know what that means. He has written on the Catholic moral tradition in multiple books and journals, including contributions on the topics of war and peacemaking, environmental ethics, and the ethics of friendship. Last year, Cascade Press released his book, Serve and Protect, Selected Essays on Just Policing. And this month, Conversations on Jesuit Higher Education published his article, titled Mission, Values, and Campus Policing Practices on Jesuit Campuses. So please join me in welcoming our 4 panelists today. So where I would like to start is I would like to have each of our panelists just do a brief 5-minute introduction. And I'm going to give them a little prompt to work off of. And I will start with Chief DeYoung. And I was wondering if you wouldn't mind providing some remarks highlighting how policing and security work is similar in on-campus and off-campus settings.
Thank you, Shannon. And I just want to say I'm glad to be here with everyone today. It should be a stimulating conversation, I hope. You know, I think there's a fundamental similarity between campus law enforcement and municipal policing. And really it resides both internally within our own agencies and externally in the services that we render to the public. So if we talk about the external first, the public, regardless of where we work, right, in a campus or a town, we're still interacting with human beings, right, when we're responding to calls and everything that means. There's no division of realities here between the campus versus the municipality in our line of work. Students, employees, faculty, folks who show up on campus who have no affiliation with the college at all, you know, everyone's a human being, and we, as such, we don't leave our life experiences, our personalities, our problems or issues at the gate when we step onto campus. People don't typically present drastically different depending on where they are, whether it's a campus or municipality. So we bring everything with us, right? So as the police are called on to respond to whatever the problem is, you know, we're grappling with a myriad nuances and challenges unique to that person or situation, and at times we're making really fast decisions. So the patch on my shoulder could be Holy Cross, Worcester Police, you know, Milwaukee or Marquette or Scranton or University of Scranton. We're all doing the same work. And internally in our departments, the similarities are obvious, right? We're in a uniformed appearance. We come from very structured organizations. We all share challenges with recruitment of candidates that, you know, that represent diversity. Retention of veteran officers is challenging. Morale issues in today's climate. I know I speak for my colleague chiefs that we're all deeply concerned about the mental health of our officers and their well-being. And lastly, you know, how we're challenged with how to affect change and strike a balance with affecting real cultural shifts in the departments while still validating the hard work that the officers do every day that, let's be honest, few people sign up to do. So we have to all learn the similarities, and we're all learning how to own it all, good and bad.
Thank you, Chief. Chief Hudson, I would like to ask you to give a response to that same question.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this important panel discussion, along with my other panelists and our moderator. So law enforcement and campus safety and security work is more challenging now than it's ever been, both on and off campus. And navigating the impact of the pandemic, demands for reform, staffing shortages, budgetary constraints, the loss of trust from our communities and other factors has been difficult. However, it's created new opportunities for partnership and healing. Each of our AJCU campus safety departments have unique structures in which they are best suited to serve their particular community's needs. Some have unarmed security professionals, others have armed, some have certified law enforcement officers, or a combination of all three. At Marquette University, our police department has both certified law enforcement officers as well as unarmed security officers who provide safety and security services for our campus on and off campus communities. Although our constituencies for both on and off campus are different, the tasks associated with each of them are also different at times. We employ the same Catholic and Jesuit mission-based philosophy, no matter which constituency we're serving. On campus, we work closely with our university stakeholders to ensure the physical, mental, and spiritual well-being of our students, faculty, staff, and visitors. This is done by both enforcing laws and rules when appropriate, and also by offering self-defense classes, public safety and security tips, engaging in community outreach programs like Coffee with a Cop. At Marquette, we have something called the Backpack Program, which is designed to assist our students with food insecurity, and we participate in a host of other community outreach events on campus. Our university is located in an area of Milwaukee where a pretty large percentage of the people that live surrounding our campus in Marquette's patrol zone are from the marginalized and poor communities. We're fortunate that we have a very strong relationship with our community partners. From our alderman's office, there is a nonprofit organization called Near West Side Partners that has worked very diligently on the revitalization and sustaining of businesses and residential corridors within the geographic area where Marquette is located. We work closely with our district attorney's office, our homeless outreach team for the county, our behavioral health center, local law enforcement, and several other businesses and community groups, because it takes a dedicated group of professionals from different disciplines to help our community members who are in desperate need of assistance right now because they have nowhere else to turn. We work along with these partners to find root cause solutions for our off-campus community members that's consistent with our mission. I can honestly say that our officers practice cura personalis daily. Our policing philosophy is not focused on making arrests. We can't arrest our way out of the problems that are plaguing society. We focus on addressing the needs of the perpetrator as well as the community. A quick example of this is one of our officers was sent to a shoplifting complaint of a woman who was stealing diapers, and the store workers wanted to prosecute her for the theft. Our officer figured out that really her need was something that a ticket or arresting just really wouldn't solve the problem. So he found a community resource that supplies diapers and connected that woman with that resource. And we've never had another issue with that particular person shoplifting. And that really is the type of policing that we practice. However, if someone needs to be arrested, obviously that's the right solution. That's what we do. So in conclusion, though the demands for service are different in our on and off campus communities, our commitment to serve each person we come into contact with respect, fairness, and compassion never changes. It's rooted in our mission. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Hudson. Sergeant Rude, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the day in the life of a campus officer, highlighting some of the highs and lows in the work that you're doing.
Firstly, thank you for inviting me to take part today. As far as speaking for towards the day in the life, highs and lows, they seem like they come throughout the day. You have good times, you have bad times. A lot of the good times, I do often find myself, and it's sad to say this, in somebody else's bad time, where it's a good time for me to be able to help somebody through a moment that, for a lot of our students, their interactions with us often are the first time that they're interacting with law enforcement in any way. So it kind of does build itself into, potentially in their mind, the worst moment of their life. And for me to be able to counsel somebody and assist them through that moment is actually a high point of the day for me. Low points of the day for me is seeing the damage that decisions and situations can do to somebody. But like I said, at times it does lend itself to the high points of my day. Most of the interactions that I do have with people throughout the day, I can sit back, even though some of them may wind up being frustrating at the moment. I can sit back and look at them as being positives. My mentality on incidents is typically to try to make this person want to come back to me in the future. So it's utilizing that moment as a teaching moment. If somebody is having a disciplinary issue or behavioral, something that's in violation of whether it's state law or the student behavioral contract on campus here, or if it's a positive moment, it's nice to be able to have an interaction with people because, at the root of all of this, that's kind of why I got into policing. Everybody likes to write serve and protect on their car, but, it's another thing to actually, put that forward and take part in that mentality in that moment with every interaction with each person.
Thank you, Sergeant Rude. And lastly, Dr. Winwright, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the work that you've done, and particularly this idea around Jesuit institutions becoming laboratories and models for public safety and policing.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and thank you to my fellow panelists and everyone who's involved with this wonderful opportunity for us to learn from each other and have a conversation about this topic. Back in 1984, when I was an undergraduate at another USF, University of South Florida, I worked my way through 4 years in law enforcement, and I still have my very first handcuff key from 1984. And I ended up becoming a theologian and an ethicist much later, and I've been at St. Louis University for quite a while now. And my dissertation at Notre Dame back in the 90s was on the use of force in policing and the challenge of policing. It's a topic that actually ethicists and theologians had not really addressed over the centuries. One of the reasons why is because the institution of policing, as we know it, only goes back to 1829 with the founding of the London Metropolitan Police by Sir Robert Peel. And his vision of the police was that they are to be an alternative to the military. So they wore blue coats instead of red coats. And the use of force was supposed to be an instrument that was a very last resort. And they were traditional policing in its origins was actually community policing. There was to be citizens in and of the community working with their partners, fellow citizens in the community, addressing all sorts of things from homelessness to putting out fires. And yes, as a very last resort, the use of force to effect an arrest. But even they, as you know, even to this day, in other countries such as England, Ireland, police often don't have firearms. That's something that is pretty much an American thing, part of our story when policing became transplanted here in the 1830s and 1840s. In the North, policing became much more, contrary to Peel's vision, became very mired in kind of corruption and politics and defending the property of the wealthy. In the South, the police there associated with the slave patrols and racism. So the history of policing in this country is much different than it had to be. But my point is, policing is a human institution and a human construct. And every society throughout history has had something called a police function, even if they didn't call it police. Even Gandhi said that every community, even a most nonviolent community, has to have somebody that is authorized to use force, but hopefully at a very last resort and only when necessary. So there's been a lot of attention to police lately. As an ethicist, we ask not only what should we do, we ask another question, who ought we be? And that's a question about our identity, our mission, our values. Martin Luther King Jr. referred to it as our creed. Our creed is just as much as important as our deeds, and they should be in alignment. Our deeds, our actions, our practices should be aligned with who we say we are. Another question to ask is, well, what's going on? Vatican II called it reading the signs of the times. That means looking at the history. What has happened historically? Policing has been changing. And in this country, it has become, in recent decades, very weaponized, very militarized. And actually the racism that was endemic with the slave patrols in the South during the 20th century also migrated into the North. So we've seen the signs of the times with regard to Michael Brown, with George Floyd, with Breonna Taylor, and so many more. And even with campus policing, there was the shooting by a University of Cincinnati police officer of a man, an unarmed man, a few years ago during a traffic stop off campus. There is also the pepper spraying in 2011, University of California, Davis, officer, it was very iconic, pepper sprayed students right in their face. So policing now is coming rightly under scrutiny. And so you have people calling for defunding or abolition, and that's obviously something that we must address on our campuses. Therefore, as Jesuit campuses with Cura Personalis, the Magus, and other, we claim to follow the Prince of Peace, Jesus Christ. Wouldn't it be interesting? This is an opportunity for us to maybe reevaluate public safety. And actually, in my research of Jesuit universities, the 28 in this country, they're not all the same. Some are actually unarmed, like Seattle. Some are armed. And there's a spectrum of approaches, and some are definitely tethered to the mission. Some are not. What would it look like if we use this opportunity to together in partnership with one another as a community, examine public safety and what it should look like as we go forward together on our campuses?
Thank you, Dr. Wainwright. So to our audience, I want to let you know that we also want this to be an interactive conversation. So please feel free to start popping in questions that you would like our panelists to answer. One of the things that I heard as far as a common theme from all of you is sort of this connection to humanity, right? We are humans, and first and foremost, that's how we are interacting with one another. And I find that to be very much connected to our ideas around Jesuit mission, right? It's about, the person and being where they are and meeting them where they are and things of that nature. So the question that I have for all of you would be, what elements of the Jesuit mission do you find easiest to translate or implement into the work that you're doing? And also the flip side of that, which ones do you find to be the most difficult?
Well, I'll start. As we look at the mission and, Holy Cross is a community, and our mission statement includes language marked by freedom, mutual respect, and civility. And I think that that our responsibility to know our community is in my mind my foremost concern and priority. And we need to understand our community. We need to understand we have an obligation to be open to hearing how we're perceived, in understanding that our students come to us not speaking, about their experience, but speaking through their experience. And so I think what's relatively easy for me in order to meet that mission, to make sure my department is positioned so that my officers understand their responsibility to that end, is to have those conversations. And we engaged in some tough conversations before, right after COVID hit. We had some meetings with student groups that I thought went really well. It was such an interesting experience for me. I had a recent, large meeting with resident assistants. We were asked to train them on marijuana and alcohol and that kind of thing. And the conversation, they didn't want to hear about marijuana and alcohol. They wanted to talk about race and policing. And I was very comfortable going there. I had 4 officers with me. The students asked they asked hard questions, they asked really good questions. Very obviously passionate about what they were feeling in the moment. And I was very comfortable taking it in and trying to respond as openly as I could on the fly. But it was interesting. The other professionals in the room who weren't from my department were really uncomfortable with this. They thought, oh no, we can't have the conversation go there. That's not why they're here. And I said, no, we need to have, this is a conversation that's important, right? We don't just shut this off because that wasn't the theme of the meeting. So we're learning to be more open to that. And I have work to do to take it further than that. But I think for me, that part about listening and being open and mutual respect and civility is just key.
Thank you. Anyone else want to add?
Yeah, I'd like to add something. Just to, we too at Marquette had very similar conversations with students relative to race and other concerns last summer and the summer before last. But what I was very glad about is we've established a relationship with our students of color prior to some of the troubling incidents that occurred. And because we had that relationship already established and that trust established, I think we were able to have a more productive conversation than if we didn't have that relationship. There were some other groups on campus that we hadn't engaged with, and they were a little bit more antagonistic because those relationships hadn't been developed. But overall, we continue in that care, that cure personalis for our students to develop relationships that are meaningful, and not because something bad happened, but just because we care. Also, I'd like to point out that caring for our students doesn't mean that we won't hold them accountable. I always find it chuckling. I chuckle when students say to me, well, how can you, espouse a belief in cura personalis when you gave me a ticket or you told student conduct that I was intoxicated? Well, part of the lesson of growing up is being held accountable. And sometimes that's the best tool to show that you care, is to hold a student accountable for behavior that will really be detrimental for them later on in life.
Mm-hmm. I think we're seeing a theme here of, really these conversations and connecting with the community and all of that. And Sergeant Root, I know that you had a plan to do a tabling program on your campus that that you planned on sitting out and just promoting conversations with students throughout your campus. I know that COVID kind of derailed that, but could you talk about that plan a little bit?
COVID did kind of derail it, and it's still off the rails a little bit due to the interactions that we're allowed to have in person on campus. Not that we're allowed to, but that we're recommending having on campus. But yeah, honestly, it's called Let's Just Talk. I set up a table on a common area on campus, whether it's outside or in one of our campus buildings, where I just sit there at a table with a sign that says, "Let's just talk." I throw on the uniform, and whatever conversation somebody wants to approach me and have at that point, it's to be determined by the person that's approaching me. It's a way not only to break down the barriers and have just basic quote unquote normal conversation, but it's also to allow the people in our community to see past the uniform and understand that there is a person in there who want to have a conversation. I don't want to only have an interaction with you at a devastating or bad moment, negative moment in your life. We can talk about, the bad interactions that you may have had with law enforcement prior to coming to the university, something like that. And while I can't speak for an officer that you had an interaction with in the past, maybe I can provide some type of explanation as to, maybe what the officer was thinking. If it was a negative interaction that you had with law enforcement, where I would look at that and say, the officer was clearly wrong in this moment, then you'll hear that from me as well. Okay, so it's just a way to, try to take the uniform off me, make me a person, and try to make me understand a little bit more, maybe some of the bad interactions that you've had with law enforcement, so I can relate that back to my staff and take it myself and say, okay, now I'm seeing maybe where an officer handled this situation incorrectly in the past or insensitively in the past. Let's not step into the same trap here.
So I've heard some language being used interchangeably. I've been seeing some back and forth between the term police and policing, public safety, campus safety. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the differences in your view, and what should campus community members know or understand about these distinctions when we're using this language. Given recent national events surrounding law enforcement, does using the term police rather than public safety, for example, would that present tensions or challenges with the student, the faculty, students, faculty, other community members? And sort of what your preference is. Do you have a preference on using the term police versus public safety and things of that nature?
Are you directing that towards me? If anybody doesn't
No,
mind.
it's open, but you feel free to go ahead and start.
Okay. And this shooting from the hip here, sorry to use that terminology, but that's what it is for me. I almost look at this as like a target, like your bullseye target, with public safety being the outer ring where, we are involved as campus police in the greater area here. It's not just campus as far as public safety goes in my mind. It would include emergency medical services in the hospitals and, fire departments, stuff like that, as, let's take care and keep an eye, let's keep everybody safe from any and all threats, whether it be a fire, whether it be an auto accident, something like that, and that being your public safety. And then campus safety would be the next inner ring as you zero in a little bit more on campus. How do we deal with specifically the issues that are could be looked at as threats on campus? And then policing almost zeroes in specifically to me, in my mind, on crime. Okay, so if we're referring to, we're going to police that area, we're going to, if we have an event on campus or a high crime area on or around campus, I would consider policing that area. Okay, let's patrol our officers in that area, keep an eye out for, open doors, someone climbing in a window, large groups that, potentially look hostile, something like that. That's where I separate those three terms.
Yeah, Dr. Wainwright?
So in my article, I concluded with a call to maybe retrieve the word peace officers or public peacekeepers. The word police, it has some connotations that are negative. Nobody wants to live in a police state, for example. So, there's a function of providing safety and legitimate defense of others. And that's very important, but to call it public safety, yeah, I agree with that, how that's more all encompassing, a wider umbrella. Maybe, different departments at different Jesuit universities have different names. Some police departments, some public safety departments, some are a combination of the two. At some point, our universities decided to create these departments, and who was involved in naming them and then organizing them in a certain way that we have. And then some are armed and some are unarmed. Who Catholic social teaching calls for participation of all the stakeholders. And so was it just, hey, these universities down the street, this is what they're doing, public universities are doing, and other private ones, let's just do it too? Or are we more intentional and maybe using this as an opportunity to rethink, how we present ourselves? I saw in the chat, somebody noted that, maybe we hire some persons for our campus departments who have a lot of previous experience in other kinds of law enforcement, state highway patrol officers or something like that. And as I said earlier, there's a warrior mentality that has become much more dominant, and we certainly don't want that on our campuses. So maybe to call ourselves peacekeepers, peace officers or something like that would help align our practices of public safety more with our ultimate values, as institutions affiliated with the Jesuit order, that's part of the Catholic Church, founded, ultimately by Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace.
So I'm going to use that to segue into a hot button question that I'm sure you all have encountered in your roles. And it's around the arming of our campus police or campus public safety. What are your thoughts on that? I'm going to simply just ask, should officers be armed or not? And how do you best figure out how to answer that question from your perspectives?
I think it depends. I think it depends on the community. I think it depends on where you're located. I think it depends on the responsibility of the public safety or the law enforcement agency for whatever university. Marquette University, our patrol area doesn't just encompass our campus, it extends for a couple of blocks around our campus. Unfortunately, the crime rate in our area much lower than some other areas within the city of Milwaukee, but there still are concerns here. And our city police department is woefully understaffed right now. So I think that for us, for Marquette, I think it's a good option for us, but it may not necessarily be the best option for other universities.
I know I mentioned Seattle University earlier. Look at their website. They even have given attention to the relationship with the local law enforcement there. Same here in St. Louis. Given the history of policing here where I am, and with regard to race and excessive force, in the healthcare ethics, Catholic institutions, Catholic hospitals and healthcare systems are very concerned about, being in partnerships with non-Catholic ones who may not actually adhere to the same values that we do from beginning of life to end of life. And there's something even there about, well, we can, but it's got to be kind of remotely, it can't be directly and stuff like that. These are issues that I don't see being, I haven't found it considered seriously at many of our institutions with regard to public safety. Even if your police department is unarmed, but you rely on a local law enforcement agency, hopefully it's a reformed community policing model of policing, but what if it is not?
Chief DeYoung or Sergeant Rude, do you all want to chime in?
I was just going to comment that I agree with Edith. I think it depends. From my personal experience, well, in Massachusetts, we're going through our own police reform laws now. We're all aligning with the new law. And interestingly, Tobias, Massachusetts police reform, the new governing body is called the Peace Officer Standards and Training. However, within that law, all police departments in the state, whether you're a municipality or a campus, if you're sworn, which means you have full powers of arrest, we are now all called law enforcement officers. And that is how it's legally referenced. So, but we are the Department of Public Safety. We're armed, we're sworn, right? I don't know the evolution of the name of our department, although I agree with Kevin, in the municipal world, DPS includes medical response and fire response and police response. So it has a broader, in my department, frankly, our highest call volume are medicals. We respond to more medicals than anything else. But in terms of arming, I have worked for a department when I started out at UNC Wilmington when I was 30 years ago. They were armed back then, and that's all. It was in the South. I'm from North Carolina. It was never anything except that. I was there for several years. I went to Boston College. Boston College was armed when I got there. They had been for a number of years. I went from there. I took some time off, then I jumped back in to law enforcement. I went to Springfield Tech. They were not armed, and interestingly, they were in one of the highest violent crime rate mid-cities in the country. And we did arm our officers only after a number of shootings and a number of very close calls. But I will say that they were a scrappy bunch of excellent police officers who knew how to de-escalate a situation because they absolutely had to, because they did not have a firearm. But the first time we came across a machine gun, things changed. So, it was a very different environment. Worcester is the second largest city in the state. Worcester is understaffed. We don't, they call on us under transferred authority to respond to calls in the area if they're short-staffed. So they're asking us to go out and respond to calls. They're pretty low-level calls, but they certainly aren't without some risk. So as we're working with our partners in the cities and towns, and everybody's challenged with staffing, and you know, the risk factors change a little bit. So hopefully that's short-lived. Right now, that's the context.
Got it. So we're getting some questions. I'm gonna shift a bit. We're getting some questions around the urban context of the work that you all are doing. So the next set of questions I'm going to send your way are from that framework. So first, some questions around off campus. I know a few of you mentioned how your officers are able to go beyond the realm of campus. So there's some questions around what are your authorities off campus, and what can you do as a campus police department or public safety department with folks off campus?
Okay, the legislation that governs our police department is a little bit different than municipal law enforcement. And what they've identified our jurisdiction as is our campus property and then immediate and adjacent to that property. There's no yard line, there's no foot line, anything like that. So it basically means what's immediately public property that surrounds the property that we own and use to educate our students. What we have as far as authority there are our university police officers, myself being one of them. We have full law enforcement authority in those areas on our campus and immediately adjacent to our property. We do have unarmed service officers or security officers. They have no legal arrest powers or anything like that. They're strictly a security function. We do patrol outside of our immediate and adjacent areas, but what that does is it brings us into a partnership, not necessarily a legal mutual aid agreement, but a memo of understanding with the city police department that says we will respond to calls in our university community areas, such as where all of our off-campus students live, which is just within a block of campus. We do patrol in those areas because we want them to see us. We want them to, you come to us if there's a problem. We are right here. We don't leave the campus area. City police, somebody mentioned the staffing issues with municipal police departments across the country right now. Scranton Police Department is dealing with it as well. They appreciate that we do extend out into the community a bit, but they understand the constraints that we have of being non-jurisdictional at some point where we can hold a scene as long as somebody is not being physically assaulted or something like that. We will hold the scene until they arrive and just be a great witness. But in the event that there is a physical assault taking place, if we're first there, then we have to handle that. We have to stop an assault from taking place, detain until they do get there. So there's a little bit of a difficulty with it, but the more that we interact with the local police department and the local community for them to also be able to understand that situation, the better it is for us.
Thank you.
Marquette has a very similar authority that was granted to us by the state legislature. We have a defined area that extends beyond our campus where we have the authority. We are considered like a secondary police department. The city of Milwaukee still remains as the primary law enforcement agency. However, we have the same authority within our area as the city of Milwaukee Police Department's police officers do. We can extend into the city of Milwaukee to assist them, just as any other area providing mutual aid, but that doesn't happen very often. We are pretty good about staying in our area and just responding to assignments within our patrol area.
Some other questions around urban context that we're getting as well deals with how do you deal with the unhoused populations that are near your campuses. And with that, there's a couple of questions around how do you effectively incorporate anti-racism into policing in largely non-white neighborhoods? And how do you balance the needs of the local non-white and or poor populations with the expectations of what are often upper class white parents and student populations? Not all at once.
It's a lot. That's a lot. That's a lot. Can we,
It is a lot.
start,
It is a
can we
lot.
start with the top of that first again, Shannon?
Yes, yes, yes. So how do you work with your unhoused populations? So, you know, the homeless that are in and around your campuses.
Frankly, Holy Cross is situated in a position just on the sort of in an awkward position for the unhoused population. They don't generally find their way to us, although on occasion they do. We work with the Worcester Police Department to frankly find a shelter that has availability in the moment. I mean, that's literally, it comes down to just making phone calls and getting transportation and getting that individual where they need to go. Every shelter has its rules and regs, you know, around who they can accept and who they can't accept. But we work to the extent that we do deal with them. We work with our locals to figure it out. We're not pushing them off campus and trespassing them and saying, good luck, you know, take off. We're trying to find a place for them.
Yeah.
At Marquette, one of our the city's largest rescue missions for our unhoused population is within our patrol area in very close proximity to one of our residence halls. So we have quite a bit of interaction with that particular population. We partner very closely with our county resources that provide assistance for finding housing or assistance with mental illness. We provide our officers with additional CIT training, crisis intervention training, so that our officers are as best equipped as we could possibly be to help our community members that are in crisis. And we also work with other community resources to help with there's a variety of different concerns that particular population has that isn't criminal in nature, but we're the only ones here to help them and connect them with resources. So we spend a very high percentage of our time involved with the unhoused population.
Yes, Tobias?
These are great. Again, the community engagement, partnerships with others. This in Catholic social teaching, it talks about intermediary associations. So we've got a lot of, in Eugene, Oregon, there's this program called Cahoots that people can call instead of 911, instead of a police officer, mental health people, professionals to address things. And maybe just as public safety used to involve, you know, first responders, like firefighters, as well as police. And we've kind of divided that up, but police now, a lot of our students, as well as the community, they just see a problem and they don't know who to call. And we need to provide and be very transparent and really inform people. Like our university has mental health crisis teams that can respond to maybe some things and the police don't. So more things like that we can, you know, imagine and create and implement in our campuses would go a long ways to addressing, you know, we're supposed to be very concerned for the poor, the marginalized, the vulnerable, preferential option for the poor. So these communities, including persons who are on our streets, this is very important, but it's not something that necessarily is something that police need to be addressing solely, for sure.
I couldn't agree with you more. You know, we respond to somebody asked about mental health issues, and I'm sure Edith and Kevin also, like our department's busy at night, right? Responding to the range, a student who's anxious, some anxiety stuff going on, others who are actively self-harming, others who are making plans for suicide, you name it, right? Look, we're not making a diagnosis on the street, but you're right. We do a really good job, I think, at Holy Cross. They contracted out to an on-call sort of psychologist after hours, after our counseling services closes. That number is available across the campus all the time, but students still call us, or friends still call us, or the RA calls us, right? Because we're the ones who are going to show up at the door. And I will say, honestly, that our police officers, we have a cell phone, they carry a cell phone on duty with them. They take it to the call and they facilitate that phone call with an on-call psychologist and get someone on the phone. I agree with you. The officers you shouldn't necessarily have a police uniform showing up at the door to help someone who's in a mental health crisis. To the extent that that's what you have and that's the model you have, you better make sure your police officers are those individuals who can do that kind of work effectively, to make that connection. And to someone else's question about hiring, retired municipal officers, sometimes they're great. Other times it's really tough to get somebody like that into this job, understanding that, guess what, your role is very, very different here on this campus, and you better be prepared to do it. But I agree with you. I would love to propose a model that's sort of a team approach to all of these sorts of issues. I don't know that I'll be successful right now, but I'm definitely eager for it. Sometimes a student called us last week. They waited 30 minutes for somebody from the on-call place to call them back. And he called us back and he said, can you please just send one of your officers? I'm just so sad. I mean, he really just needed us to be there. And it's that kind of thing in my mind as a chief, that when my guys and gals get there and they show up and they figure out how to help this kid, right? And we do put them in touch with that counselor, but they needed somebody that they could count on. And that's meaningful. So you can't eliminate us altogether, but there definitely needs to be a team approach.
I think Dr. Wainwright and anyone else who wants to jump in on this question, this is really a reimagination of how we are doing policing and things of that nature. I was wondering, based on some of the research that you have done, what are some of the strategies that you would use to examine how we are doing public safety on our campuses and to determine what would those strategies look like? So what would that look like on the ground? Would it be workshops, trainings? What are your thoughts around that? And then if any of the current law enforcement folks that are joining us, if you could talk about some of the work that you may have done on your campuses to incorporate some of that.
All right. Well, some things have been mentioned already, such as town halls, meeting students, and being out there and present, sitting there and having coffee with a cop or whatever. But there's a lot of best practices and emerging practices, I think, just to try to cultivate and create a culture. So training, hiring, there's a lot. We need to be intentional about who we're hiring and do they subscribe to the kinds of values and mission that we're talking about now. Obviously, there's studies, research showing that we can do implicit bias training, and that actually is fruitful and effective. I mean, a lot of studies and research there that shows, as was said at the very outset, our officers are persons too, and they bring biases with them. They bring their lives with them. Actually, we all do. I mean, part of the problems we're talking about, arming, not arming, that's a problem of our society. We have too many guns. The problem of racism, systemic, structural, institutional racism in this society, that's mirrored by policing and public safety. So, and one study I read said that, the implicit bias that actually the wider public is just as likely to shoot a Black suspect as a trained law enforcement officer. So actually this kind of training actually diminishes, the likelihood of unjust use of force, especially against persons of color. Our wider society has these problems even more so. So I would recommend advisory committee composed of students as well as faculty, especially experts in these kinds of areas that we're talking. So I'll stop now and let others speak.
Thank you. Other thoughts?
Hiring for mission is where it starts. And I think those were very, very helpful things that you talked about, Dr. Wainwright. And we do many of those here at Marquette, but there's always opportunities for improvement. And we're working toward doing better and engaging, especially our student community, a little bit more than we had done in the past. We are fortunate we have a new training supervisor that joined us within the last 6 months, and he's creating a curriculum. We received some training. It's called the RIGHT training, racial intelligence training and engagement, I think is the name of it. And it's a type of implicit bias training, but it focuses on emotion. It calls to attention, the officer's attention, their emotions and where they are. Because when your emotions are high, if you're angry, if you're upset, you're going to make bad decisions. So focusing a little bit more on emotion, things that I think officers will receive much better than finger pointing and saying, hey, you're a bad person, you're racist. Which does not go over well at all. But focusing on emotion and drawing into that poor decision making when you're in an emotional state that doesn't help you, you are likely to make very poor decisions, and oftentimes race will be a factor in those decisions. So we'll be implementing that within the next 3 to 4 months or so. We'll start training with all of our officers, and then we'll share it with our students, so our students will see and hopefully have more confidence in who we are as their police department, because they see the training that we're receiving.
I would just add on that note that a lot of the callers to dispatch, they use the language that actually is problematic to describe a suspicious person or something. And so I've done some reading lately about how we can train our dispatchers to ask better questions about, what behavior is actually causing you to call us. So it's more behavior focused rather than appearance focused. But and we need to keep a record of these kinds of things. So a lot of times the police on the front, they get the blame for something when actually it started at the other end, that initiated the whole thing in the first place. So this again is something that we need to do as a community.
That's right. I'll just comment quickly. We actually do train our dispatchers and have a policy on that very thing. And our police department, our police officers have gone through 4 various implicit bias trainings in the last 1.5 years, 4 de-escalation trainings in the last 1.5 years, cultural awareness training, how to communicate with people who are in mental crisis. And we've just training is non-negotiable for me, and it's got to be real, right? We got a grant for insight conflict resolution training, how to communicate effectively with people in conflict. It's that same thing Edith said, how to slow down, right? How to slow down when you're responding to a call. That's huge. So all of these things are super ideas, and I'm seeing it bear out. I've already seen the officers applying the skills that they've used in these calls, and it has made a difference.
Yes, we have similar trainings as well. We call it racism by proxy. And we work very hard with not only our dispatchers, but also with our police officers. If a call makes it through the dispatcher, then the officer is to question it when they receive the call from dispatch. And then if it's something that that they believe where it could potentially be racism by proxy, the officers will cancel themselves from it, and they'll call the caller back and say, okay, you need to give us more information because this doesn't sound right.
Yeah, and our experiences kind of echo what everybody else has said here as far as the language that's being used and referring to people as suspicious on campus. The dispatchers are, they are trained now to say, well, what is suspicious about the situation, and then they describe clothing or they describe somebody's race or something like that. And it's like, okay, we're not going to respond to that. We are going to respond directly to you though. And we're going to try to, have a conversation about, you know, the way that somebody is dressed or the way their hair is done or the fact that they have tattoos or the color of their skin does not make them suspicious. Behaviors make you suspicious, you know, not people's features, not people's skin color, not their background or anything like that. So, you know, training is paramount. I have to echo what the chief said. You know, it's not negotiable for me as well. If my staff is unwilling to move forward with training or voluntarily take part in training, then I have some immediate concerns as to what's going on in your mind that's not coming out of your mouth, you know, and, you know, is that implicit bias or is it something that you know that you're aware of, you know, and that's the person that we want to eliminate, not just from our campus and not from just our department, but from law enforcement in general, you know, from, you know, police departments, public safety departments in general.
If I can just add one last thing about this topic, I'm extra sensitive to this because I have a college age student, my child, who's a Black male, who when he's in town spends a lot of time around campus. He has a lot of friends here, and I want my child to be treated fairly. And just as much as I want my child to be treated fairly, I want everybody else's child that's on this campus to be treated fairly. So we take this very seriously at Marquette, and we work very hard to make sure that all of our students, whenever we're called to a call for police, are being treated fairly.
I was wondering, do any of your campuses engage in restorative justice work? And if you do, could you say a bit about what that experience has been like?
I appreciate that question. I'm not going to answer it the way you want it, but restorative justice, just to explain, is becoming more prominent and as opposed to retributive justice or, you know, other things. So giving a ticket or a fine, things like that is kind of a punishment, but, you know, and there needs to be accountability, yes, but for a Jesuit campus, it should be ultimately directed towards somehow a restoration of the person to the community. So I'd be curious to hear some more on that too.
Holy Cross currently does not exercise any platform in that regard, but I did hear that they are training to that end, and they've been sort of picking at it a little bit over the last year, but not in a formal way. But that, I think, is very soon to change, and I look forward to our department being a part of that to the extent that we're involved. So.
During my days with Milwaukee's Police Department, we were very involved in restorative justice. At the time, Marquette University had one of the leaders here in the state of Wisconsin, Judge Janine Geske, who worked here at Marquette, who was involved in that. Other things have happened and that's gone to the wayside, but I think my team and I will begin to work on a way to reestablish that. I think it helps so much, especially when our students say there's a theft or something and it's a community member that's involved. I think there's no better way to help them see God in everything and everyone than going through that restorative justice process and actually talking to the person that was involved in their incident. So we're looking at doing that. Funding and staffing are always issues, but that's something that's very worthwhile. And thank you for bringing that up.
Sergeant Rude, Scranton, is it used there?
We don't have any program that the University Police Department is involved in that I'm aware of right now. And if we were, I mean, we're dealing with the staffing issues. If we were involved in a program, I'd probably be taking part in it myself due to staffing issues or, you know, just my desire to be involved with the community. But if there's anything that is taking place on our campus, it would be a part of our internal judicial system and our Office of Student Conduct. You know, so our police department, I don't believe, is involved in anything directly with it. It may be through that.
So I am conscious of time. We have about 5 minutes left. This was a very quick 75 minutes. So I wanted to wrap up with this one question, well, two questions, I guess. So as public safety leaders, you know, how do you stay encouraged in our current world and how we are, how policing and public safety, how it's currently perceived? And also, what leadership strategies are you yourself using to encourage and prepare your staff to be the next leaders in your profession?
Well, we have a comfort dog that I go to when I need when I need to be encouraged, right? Big fluffy golden doodle named Gracie in the department. But no, I'm encouraged. You know, I tend to be sort of a hopeful person and a hard worker by nature, and I'm just driven to make this better. I came into this profession understanding it to be a noble profession, and despite all of the tragedies and all of the bad seeds among us and bad apples, I still am convinced that this is a noble profession and it is worthy of our time and energy. And I'm not leaving until we see some sort of change. I try to model what I can, but I want to point out that it can't be on my shoulders. It can't be on Edith's shoulders or Kevin's shoulders, right? This is about the people around us and below us. I have a sergeant's promotion. We're going through a process right now for interviews for sergeant's promotion internally. I've asked, aside from the general standard panel, interview, I've asked them all to write an essay looking at the college's mission statement and Sir Robert Peel's principles of policing, and find the intersections between those two things and what we do in our department and how we reflect one of the 9 principles and how we reflect the mission. And that's going to bear some weight with the decision I make as to who's going to be a leader on shift, because a street boss, the sergeant is a street boss, and they are arguably the most important rank in a police department.
For me, I'm very fortunate. I have a very strong support system. My family and my friends are great, and I love them dearly. But I believe firmly that God has planted me here at Marquette for a reason, and He's not going to desert me. He's not going to forsake me. That He's equipped me with everything that I need to succeed. And when He decides it's time for me to move on, then it'll be time for me to move on. And that really helps me to stay encouraged on a daily basis. And as far as my team, I'm very encouraged with the new people that are coming into law enforcement. I really wish there were more, and I wish there were more that were interested, but we're going to work very diligently with those that we have, and we're going to give them voice. I tell my team often that this is their police department. 10 years, 15 years from now, I don't know, hopefully I'll be retired somewhere, relaxing. And this is their police department. And the decisions we make today will determine what happens 10 years, 15 years from now. So it's important for them to have voice. And sometimes they don't choose to use their voice, but they know that they have it. And I'm really encouraged for where our policing profession will go. And I'm just very fortunate to be at a Catholic Jesuit university to be involved in mission here.
Thank you.
So speaking in how do I stay encouraged? I'm a huge believer in trying to leave a place better than how I found it. And I believe that, being a police officer, I get to do that every single day. Okay. And I try to apply it every single day. If I walk in my office and come into work in the morning and there's a bad situation here, or if it's, just a regular run-of-the-mill, not much going on day, I still have the opportunity every single day to walk out of here at the end of my shift with this place in better condition than when I found it in the morning. And if I apply that every single day, I don't have too many boring days. As far as looking down the road and, kind of transitioning out to sitting by the lake and not having much going on other than fishing, and having a little bit of comfort on what I'm leaving behind here. That's not coming anytime soon because I have young children, but what it is, if I can teach my officers to try to see things not through my eyes, but through the eyes of the community as well, then, if they're buying into, this incident is not just about you. It's not just about the people involved. It's about, the perception of how are we dealing with people. Then I think we do have a bright future. I agree with Chief DeYoung that, this is a noble profession, but it is absolutely our responsibility to make sure it remains that.
Thank you. And Dr. Wainwright, any last comments from your perspective?
I appreciate the work that my fellow panelists are doing, and it gives me hope. So often, the last several years, I think the public has kind of developed an us versus them mentality that we've accused police officers of having with regard to the public. This us versus them. We need to overcome that and work together. And you have a very high responsibility to provide safety for persons in our communities. And there's this side of the coming of the kingdom of God, there's unfortunately always the risk of harm. And so you have a very important task, and I just hope and pray that we all work together to try to make it one that's as peaceful as possible for our communities, but also ultimately, I think it'll be as peaceful as possible for you all at the end of the day. And I appreciate that.
I think today we saw that this is, these are very complicated, complex issues, which we already knew. But the two things that I kept hearing throughout many of the answers was, human. We are all humans, and we all need to treat each other in that respect of humanity and community, because together we all form the communities where we are living. So I just want to say thank you again to all of our panelists for your great insight and ability to answer some of these very complicated questions. And I also want to thank all of the participants for being so active in providing the questions that were asked here today. I didn't have to use any of my prepped questions because you were all so engaged with everything. So thank you to everyone. And lastly, just want to say we recognize that we did not get a chance to get to every question that was asked, but we will be following up with some resources that we hope will get to some of those questions as well. So thank you all, and I hope you all have a great rest of the day and week. Take care.
Thank you.